The orc woman walked into the schoolhouse at dawn with her son's hand gripped tight in hers, and a proposal that made the new schoolmaster's coffee go cold in his cup. Nathan Vance had arrived in Thornfield 3 weeks earlier, carrying 2 trunks of books and a letter of appointment from the regional governor. The village sat on the frontier's ragged edge, where farms gave way to forest, and the old wars still cast long shadows in people's memories. The schoolhouse itself was barely more than a cabin, 4 walls of rough timber and a dozen mismatched chairs, but it had a good roof and windows that let in the morning light. Nathan had spent those first weeks scrubbing years of dust from the floorboards and arranging his small library on shelves he'd built himself. He was a tall man, just past 30, with dark hair that never quite stayed in place and the kind of quiet, serious face that made children settle down when he looked at them. He'd been a soldier once, years ago, before he'd decided that teaching was a better way to leave something behind in the world. The woman who stood before him now was green-skinned, with small tusks curving up from her lower jaw and black hair braided down her back. She wore a simple homespun dress, patched but clean, and her pointed ears twitched slightly as she waited for him to speak. The boy beside her couldn't have been more than 7, small for his age, with the same green skin and nervous eyes that darted around the room like a trapped bird. "I need you to teach my son to read," she said, her voice low and steady. "His name is Corwin. I cannot do it myself because I never learned. In return, I will be yours. That is the bargain I offer." Nathan set down his cup slowly, trying to keep his expression neutral even as his mind raced. He'd expected hostility when the village learned he'd accept any child who came to his door, orc or human. He'd expected pushback, perhaps even threats. He had not expected this. "Madam," he said carefully, "I don't know your name." "Moorhen," she said. "I work at the Greystone farm north of here. I am unmarried. The bargain is fair." "No," Nathan said and watched her shoulders tense. "I won't make that bargain with you, but I will teach your son to read and it will cost you nothing. That's what a schoolmaster does." Mara's eyes narrowed. "You mock me." "I don't." Nathan stood and walked around the desk, then crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "Corwin, do you want to learn your letters?" The boy glanced up at his mother, then back at Nathan and nodded once, quick and scared. "Then you'll start tomorrow," Nathan said. "School begins at 8 in the morning and runs until noon. Bring whatever food you'll need for midday." "Can you do that?" Corwin nodded again. Nathan straightened and met Mara's gaze. "That's the arrangement. No bargains, no debts, just learning." "Why?" The word came out sharp, almost accusatory. "Because every child deserves to read," Nathan said simply. "And because I took an oath when I accepted this post that I would teach anyone who came through that door, regardless of who they were or where they came from. So that's what I'll do." Mara stared at him for a long moment, and Nathan had the uncomfortable feeling he was being measured against some internal standard he couldn't see. Finally, she nodded once. "Tomorrow, then, 8 in the morning." She turned and led Corwin out, and Nathan watched them go down the dirt road until they disappeared into the morning mist. Then he sat back down at his desk and tried to steady his hands. The next morning, Corwin arrived exactly at 8, scrubbed clean and wearing clothes that had been carefully mended. Mara walked him to the door but didn't come inside, just pressed a small bundle of food into his hands and murmured something Nathan couldn't hear. 4 human children arrived shortly after, ranging in age from 6 to 11, all from farms within walking distance. They eyed Corwin warily, and Corwin pressed himself into the corner of the back row like he was trying to disappear into the wall. Nathan spent the first hour simply learning their names and what they already knew. 2 of the children could recognize a few letters. The rest were starting from nothing. He wrote the alphabet on the slate board he'd hung on the wall and began with A, showing them how to form the shape with chalk, how to sound it out. Corwin watched everything with fierce concentration, his small hands gripping the edge of his desk. By the end of the first week, Nathan had 12 students, and by the end of the second, 15. Word had spread that the new schoolmaster actually knew what he was doing, that he was patient and fair, and that he didn't beat children for making mistakes. Corwin remained quiet and watchful, but he learned quickly. When Nathan asked him to recite the alphabet on the Friday of the second week, he did so without a single error, his voice small but steady. Mara still walked him to the door each morning and collected him each afternoon. She never came inside. Nathan tried once to tell her how well Corwin was doing, but she just nodded and led her son away before he could say more than a few sentences. It was on a Monday morning, 3 weeks into the term, that everything changed. Nathan was preparing the day's lesson when the door opened and Mara walked in with Corwin. But instead of leaving, she stood in the doorway, her jaw set in a way that suggested she'd been arguing with herself all the way there. "I want to learn too," she said. Nathan blinked. "To read?" "Yes." Her hands were clenched at her sides. "I know it is not usual. I know I am not a child. But if you meant what you said, that you would teach anyone who came through that door, then I am asking." "Of course," Nathan said before he could think better of it. "Take a seat." Mara's eyes widened slightly, as though she'd expected a fight. She sat in the back row next to Corwin, and when the other children began to arrive, they stared at her with open mouths. Nathan cleared his throat and introduced her simply as Corwin's mother, who would be joining them for lessons, and left it at that. Teaching Mara alongside the children turned out to be less complicated than he'd feared. She had the advantage of patience and motivation that most of the younger students lacked, and she listened to every word he said with the same fierce concentration her son showed. When he handed out slates for writing practice, her large, calloused hands struggled with the small piece of chalk, but she kept at it, forming the letters over and over until they started to look right. At the end of that first day, after the other children had scattered to their homes, Mara lingered. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome," Nathan replied. "You did well today, better than well, actually." She ducked her head, and if her skin hadn't been green, he thought she might have been blushing. Then she took Corwin's hand and left, and Nathan spent the rest of the afternoon trying to figure out why his heart was beating faster than usual. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for lessons, afternoons for preparing the next day's work and helping students who needed extra attention. Mara came every day, arriving with Corwin and staying through all 4 hours of instruction. She learned quickly, her adult mind able to grasp concepts that took the children longer to master. Within a month, she could read simple sentences. Within 2, she was working through one of Nathan's spare primers, sounding out words during the lunch break while Corwin played outside with some of the other children who'd finally started treating him like a classmate instead of a curiosity. Nathan found himself looking forward to those lunch breaks. While the children ate and chased each other around the schoolyard, Mara would sit at one of the desks with her book, and Nathan would sit nearby, ready to help if she stumbled over a word. They began to talk, tentatively at first, then more freely. She told him about her life on the Greystone farm, how she'd worked there since she was 16, how Corwin's father had died in a logging accident when the boy was still a baby. He told her about his years as a soldier, the things he'd seen that made him want to build instead of destroy, the way teaching felt like planting seeds that might grow into something good. "You are a good teacher," Mara said one afternoon in late autumn when the leaves outside had turned to gold and red. Corwin loves coming here. He reads to me now at night before bed, stories from the books you lend him. He's a bright boy, Nathan said, and you're a dedicated student. You should be proud of how far you've come. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that made Nathan's breath catch. I am grateful, she said softly, more than I can say. He wanted to tell her that gratitude wasn't what he was hoping for, not anymore, but the children were coming back inside, and the moment passed. It was in the 3rd month that the trouble started. Nathan had just dismissed the afternoon class when Thomas Greystone, Mara's employer, walked into the schoolhouse with 3 other men from the village council. Nathan recognized them all: Aldrich Pence, who owned the mill, Samuel Holt, who ran the general store, and Edward Thorne, whose family had founded Thornfield 2 generations back and never let anyone forget it. Mr. Vance, Edward said, his voice cold and formal, we need to have a word with you. Nathan straightened from where he'd been cleaning the slate board. Of course. How can I help you? You can explain why you're using village funds to run a charity for orcs, Aldrich said bluntly. Nathan set down the rag he'd been holding. I'm teaching children to raid. That's what the village hired me to do. Human children, Edward corrected. The school was established for the education of human children, to prepare them for productive lives in a civilized community. It was not meant to be a place where orcs could come and go as they pleased. The letter of appointment I received made no such distinction, Nathan said, keeping his voice level. It said I was to provide education to the children of Thornfield and the surrounding area. Corwin lives in the surrounding area. He's a child. I'm fulfilling the terms of my employment. And the mother? Samuel asked. She's hardly a child. She's a student who wants to learn, Nathan said. I see no reason to turn away someone who's eager to better herself. The reason, Edward said, stepping forward, is that it's not appropriate, it's not proper. And it's certainly not what this community agreed to fund when we voted to hire a schoolmaster. You're wasting time and resources on people who don't matter. Nathan felt anger rise hot in his chest, but he forced it down. They matter to me. And they matter to the principles I was taught teaching stands for. Education isn't a privilege reserved for a select few. It's a right that belongs to anyone willing to do the work to earn it. Pretty words, Aldrich said, but impractical. If you want to run a charity school, do it on your own time and your own coin. The village school is for village children. Corwin is a child, and his mother works on a farm less than 3 miles from here, Nathan said. How are they not part of this community? You know damn well how, Edward snapped. Don't play naive with us, Vance. 20 years ago we were at war with the orc clans. Good men died. Families were torn apart. You can't expect us to just forget that and welcome them into our midst like nothing happened. I don't expect you to forget, Nathan said quietly. But I do expect you to let a boy learn to raid. He didn't fight in any war. He was born years after the peace treaties were signed. He's just a child who wants an education. The 4 men exchanged glances. Thomas Greystone, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Mara's a good worker. I've got no complaint with her, but the others have a point, Vance. You're stirring up feelings that were settling down. People talk. They see an orc woman sitting in the schoolhouse, and they remember things they'd rather forget. Then maybe it's time they learn to remember differently, Nathan said. Edward's face darkened. You're being paid a salary, Vance. A salary this community voted to provide. If you can't fulfill your duties in a manner consistent with community standards, then we'll find someone who can. Consider this a warning. Send the orcs home, or we'll have to reconsider your position. They left before Nathan could respond, and he stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. That evening, after he'd eaten a cold supper and tried unsuccessfully to focus on preparing the next day's lessons, Nathan walked to the Greystone farm. It was a long walk in the dark, but he needed to tell Myra what had happened before she heard about it from someone else. He found her in the small cottage she shared with Corwin at the edge of the property. She opened the door with a look of surprise that quickly turned to concern when she saw his face. "What is wrong?" she asked. He told her, all of it. The council's visit, their threats, the choice they'd tried to force on him. She listened in silence, her expression growing more closed with every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You should do what they say." "What? I mean it." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the strain beneath it. "I knew this might happen. I should not have asked to join the lessons. It was selfish." "It wasn't selfish," Nathan said. "You have every right to learn." "Rights do not matter if you lose your position because of me," Mara said. "Corwin and I will stop coming. You can tell the council that you sent us away, and everything will go back to the way it was." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. "I won't do that." "Why?" She looked at him with those dark eyes, and he saw fear there and sadness and something else he couldn't quite name. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," he thought, but didn't say. Instead, he said, "Because it's the right thing to do. Because Corwin deserves the same chance as any other child. Because you deserve to know the joy of reading a book on your own without anyone's help. And because if I give in to them now, I'll never be able to look at myself in the mirror again." Mara's hands were clenched into fists. "You could lose everything." "Then I'll lose it," Nathan said. "But I won't compromise on this. I won't send you away." She looked at him for a long time, and he thought he saw her eyes grow bright with unshed tears. "You are stubborn," she said finally. "So I've been told, and reckless. That too. And too good for this world," she said softly. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock as always." Walking back to the village, Nathan tried not to think about what he was risking. His position, his salary, the home he'd just barely started to build here. But when he imagined telling Mara and Corwin they couldn't come back, when he imagined going back to teaching only the human children and pretending the others didn't exist, he knew he couldn't do it. Some things mattered more than security. The next morning, Mara and Corwin arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. Nathan greeted them with a smile and started the day's lesson as though nothing had changed. The human children came and went, and if any of their parents had heard about the council's visit, they didn't mention it. The day passed like any other, but word was spreading. Nathan could feel it in the way people looked at him when he walked through the village, in the conversations that stopped when he approached. He'd made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. 2 weeks later, on a cold morning with frost on the windows, Nathan arrived at the schoolhouse to find a notice nailed to the door. It was from the village council, formally informing him that his services would no longer be required at the end of the term. No explanation was given beyond a terse statement that the arrangement was not working out as hoped. Nathan stood in the cold and read the notice 3 times, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. He'd known this might happen, but knowing didn't make it easier. He had 2 months left. 2 months to teach, and then he'd be gone, looking for another position in another village where maybe they'd be more tolerant, or maybe they'd be just the same. He was still standing there when Mara arrived with Corwin. She saw his face, then saw the notice, and went very still. "They are ending your position," she said. "It wasn't a question. At the end of term, yes, because of us." Nathan pulled the notice down and crumpled it in his fist. "Because of small-minded people who think fear is the same as wisdom. Come inside, we're not done yet." but Mara didn't move. "You will lose your home, your income, all because you would not turn us away." "That's right," Nathan said. "Then I will leave." Her voice was firm, though it shook slightly. "I will take Corwin and we will go. Maybe then they will let you stay." "It's too late for that," Nathan said. "They've made their decision. And even if they hadn't, I wouldn't want you to go. These last months teaching you and Corwin, watching you both grow and learn, it's been the best part of my work here. I won't give that up, not even to save my position." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Nathan looked at her, at this strong, determined woman who'd walked into his schoolhouse months ago with a desperate bargain, and a hope she barely dared to name. And he decided he was tired of not saying what he meant. "Because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as just another student," he said. "I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when you're not here. When you smile because you've figured out a difficult passage, I feel like I've accomplished something worthwhile. I care about you, Mara, more than I probably should, and certainly more than I know how to handle. So no, I won't send you away to save my position, because losing my position would be easier than losing you." The silence that followed was so complete that Nathan could hear his own heartbeat. Mara stared at him, her eyes wide, and he had the sudden, sinking fear that he'd said too much, pushed too hard, ruined whatever fragile connection they'd built. Then she stepped forward and took his hand, her fingers warm despite the cold morning air. "I care for you too," she said quietly. "I have for weeks now. Maybe longer. I told myself I should not, that it would only lead to heartache, but I could not help it. You are kind and patient, and you see me as a person, not as a thing to be feared or used. I do not want you to suffer for my sake, but I cannot deny that my heart lifts every time I see you." Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together." "All right," she nodded, and he saw a tear slip down her cheek. "All right." Corwin, who'd been waiting patiently through this whole exchange, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mama, are we going to have lessons today?" Mara laughed, a sound that was half sob, and wiped her eyes. "Yes, little one. We are going to have lessons." They went inside, and Nathan taught that day's class with a strange sense of lightness, as though some weight he'd been carrying had finally been set down. Mara sat in her usual place, and when their eyes met across the room, they both smiled. The remaining weeks of the term took on a bittersweet quality. Nathan taught as he always had, pouring his knowledge and energy into his students. Mara continued to make progress, until she could read almost as fluently as some of the older children. Corwin, inspired by his mother's dedication, worked even harder, and by the time winter began to soften into early spring, he could read aloud from one of Nathan's storybooks without help. But the end of term was coming, and Nathan still had no idea where he'd go next. He'd written letters to other villages, other schools, but responses were slow in coming, and he suspected that word of his dismissal had spread. No one wanted to hire a troublemaker, even one who'd been fired for principles. It was Mara who came up with the idea. They were sitting together during lunch break, as had become their habit, when she set down the book she'd been reading and looked at him with sudden intensity. "What if the village changed its mind?" she asked. "I don't think they will," Nathan said. "They've made themselves clear." "But what if they had a reason to?" Mara pressed. "What if people asked them to keep you?" "What people?" "Everyone," Mara said. "Everyone you have taught. Everyone who has learned from you or whose children have learned. What if they all spoke up?" Nathan frowned. "You mean a petition?" "I mean showing them that you matter," Mara said. "That what you do here matters. The council thinks they can replace you easily, that any teacher will do the same work. What if we proved them wrong?" "How?" She smiled then, a fierce, determined smile that made Nathan's heart race. We show them what we have learned, all of us. We make them see. Over the next 2 weeks, Mara spoke quietly to the other parents, to the students, to anyone who would listen. She explained what the council had done and why, and she proposed a solution. On the last day of term, before Nathan's dismissal became official, the village would hold a public reading day. Anyone who'd learned to read under Nathan's instruction would have the chance to stand up and demonstrate what they'd gained. It would be a celebration and a protest, a way of showing the council exactly what they'd be losing if they sent Nathan away. Nathan wasn't sure it would work, but he couldn't argue with the hope in Mara's eyes. And as word of the plan spread, he was surprised by how many people agreed to participate. Not just his current students, but former students too, children who'd learned their letters years ago under other teachers, but who'd flourished under Nathan's patient guidance. Their parents came forward to say that their sons and daughters had never been so excited about learning, that they came home from school eager to practice, that Nathan had made education something to treasure instead of endure. Even some of the human adults began to show interest. One of the farmers asked if Nathan could teach him basic arithmetic during the evenings, so he could keep better track of his accounts. A grandmother who'd never learned her letters asked shyly if she might sit in on a lesson or two. Nathan said yes to all of them, and his schoolhouse became a place of learning not just for children, but for anyone who wanted it. The village council couldn't ignore what was happening. They saw the schoolhouse lit up in the evenings, heard the sound of voices reciting and discussing. Edward Thorne, in particular, seemed to grow more sour each time he passed by, but he didn't try to stop it. Perhaps he was waiting to see how the reading day went. Perhaps he thought it would be a failure, a few stumbling children that the crowd would pity but not support. If so, he was wrong. The reading day was held on a Saturday in late spring, when the air was warm and the sky was clear. Nathan had expected a modest crowd, perhaps the families of his students and a few curious onlookers. Instead, what seemed like half the village turned up, filling the schoolyard and spilling out into the road. Someone had set up benches and bales of hay for seating. Another family had brought refreshments, simple things like apple cider and bread, but offered freely to everyone who came. Nathan stood at the front, near the schoolhouse steps where he'd set up a small podium and looked at the sea of faces. His stomach was knotted with nerves, but Mara stood nearby with Corwin, and when she caught his eye, she nodded encouragingly. He cleared his throat and the crowd quieted. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today is meant to be a celebration of learning. Over the past months, I've had the privilege of teaching some of the finest students I've ever known. They've worked hard, overcome challenges, and proven that the desire to learn is something that transcends age, background, or species. Today, they're going to share what they've accomplished, and I hope you'll see what I've seen. That education is a gift, and that anyone willing to reach for it deserves the chance to hold it." He stepped back, and the first student came forward. It was one of the older children, a girl named Emma who'd been shy and uncertain when she first arrived, but who now read with confidence. She opened a book of folk tales and began to read, her voice clear and steady. When she finished the passage, the crowd applauded and she beamed. One by one, the students came forward. Some read from books, others recited poems they'd memorized or shared short essays they'd written. The younger children stumbled over words occasionally, but the crowd was patient and encouraging. The older students read longer passages, and several of them spoke about what reading had meant to them. The worlds it had opened, the ideas it had sparked, the simple joy of being able to understand the written word. Then Mara stood up, leading Corwin by the hand. Nathan's breath caught as they approached the podium. He hadn't known she was planning to participate. Mara faced the crowd, and for a moment, Nathan saw fear flicker across her face. Then she squared her shoulders and spoke. "My name is Mara Moorhen. A few months ago, I could not read a single word. I brought my son to Mr. Vance and asked him to teach the boy. I even offered a bargain, because I did not think anyone would help us for free. Mr. Vance refused the bargain but agreed to teach my son anyway. And when I asked if I could learn too, he said yes without hesitation." She paused, and the crowd was utterly silent. "I know some of you do not want us here. I know some of you think my son and I do not belong in this community, but Mr. Vance treated us like we mattered. He gave us the same time, the same care, the same respect he gave to every other student. Because of him, I can now read to my son at night. I can write my name. I can understand the world in ways I never could before. And my son, who was afraid and alone, now has friends. He has hope. He has a future." She looked down at Corwin. "Show them, little one." Corwin stepped forward, holding a small book Nathan had lent him. It was a collection of stories about animals and adventures, simple but beautifully written. Corwin opened it to a marked page and began to read. His voice was soft at first, but it grew stronger as he went on, the words flowing smoothly. He read about a brave fox who helped a lost bird find its way home, and when he finished, his face was glowing with pride. The crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't polite, scattered clapping. It was loud and genuine, and Nathan saw more than one person wiping their eyes. Mara looked out at the crowd, then at the village council members who were sitting in the front row, their faces unreadable. "Mr. Vance is a good teacher," she said, "the best I have ever known. If you send him away, you will lose something precious. I hope you will reconsider." She and Corwin stepped down, and Nathan met them at the bottom of the steps. He wanted to hug them both but settled for a smile and a whispered, "Thank you." The reading day continued for another hour, with more students, and even some of the adults, who joined the evening lessons sharing what they'd learned. When it finally ended, the crowd lingered, talking and laughing, and Nathan found himself surrounded by parents and students thanking him, shaking his hand, telling him they hoped he'd stay. Edward Thorne approached last, his expression sour. "You've put on quite a show," he said. "It wasn't a show," Nathan replied. "It was the truth." Edward looked at the crowd, at the smiling faces and the sense of community that had formed around the schoolhouse. "The council will discuss your position at our next meeting," he said stiffly. "That's all I can promise." "That's all I ask," Nathan said. The meeting was held 3 days later, and Nathan was not invited to attend. He spent the evening pacing the floor of the schoolhouse, trying to distract himself with work and failing miserably. Mara came by at dusk and they sat together in the fading light, not talking much, just being there for each other. "Whatever happens, we will manage," she said finally. "You could find another position. We could come with you." "I'd like that," Nathan said, "but I'd also like to stay. This place feels like home now. These people, even the difficult ones, they matter to me." "You matter to them too," Mara said. "I saw their faces at the reading day. You have changed this village, Nathan Vance. They would be fools not to see it." They sat in silence for a while longer, and then Mara stood to leave. At the door, she hesitated. "I meant what I said, you know, in my speech." "What part?" "All of it," she said. "But especially the part about you treating us like we mattered. You changed my life. You gave my son a future. I will never forget that." "You changed mine too," Nathan said softly. "You reminded me why I wanted to teach in the first place, why it matters." She smiled, and then she was gone, and Nathan was alone with his thoughts and his hopes. The next morning, Thomas Greystone knocked on the schoolhouse door with a letter in his hand. Nathan's heart was pounding as he opened it and read the council's decision. After much deliberation and consideration of community input, the council has decided to extend Mr. Nathan Vance's appointment as schoolmaster for an additional term. Furthermore, the school's charter is amended to explicitly state that education shall be provided to all children and interested adults within the village boundaries, without restriction of race or origin. Mr. Vance is commended for his dedication and encouraged to continue his excellent work. Nathan read it twice, then a third time, hardly daring to believe it. "They're letting me stay," he said aloud. Thomas grinned. "More than that, they're admitting they were wrong." Edward fought it tooth and nail, but the rest of the council overruled him. "Turns out that when you get 100 people telling you something, even stubborn old fools have to listen." Nathan laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me," Thomas said. "Thank your students. They're the ones who made the difference." "Well, them and a certain orc woman who's more stubborn than a mule and twice as determined." That afternoon, Nathan dismissed class early and asked Mara to stay behind. Corwin, sensing something important was about to happen, took his book and went outside to read in the sunshine. Mara looked at Nathan with curiosity. "Is something wrong?" "No," Nathan said. "Something's very right. The council has renewed my position. I'm staying." Her face lit up, and she threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. Nathan hugged her back, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. When they finally pulled apart, they were both grinning. "I am so glad," Mara said. "This is where you belong." "There's something else," Nathan said. "Something I need to say to you." He took her hands in his, feeling his heart race. "Months ago you came here and offered me a bargain. You said if I taught your son, you would be mine. I refused because I didn't want you as payment. I didn't want you to feel obligated or trapped." "I know," Mara said quietly. "But the thing is," Nathan continued, "I do want you to be mine. Not because of a bargain, not because you owe me anything, but because I've fallen in love with you. I love your strength and your determination. I love the way you care for Corwin, the way you fought for your place here. I love watching you read, seeing that look of concentration on your face when you're working through a difficult passage. I love everything about you, Mara Moorhen, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you'll have me." Mara's eyes were bright with tears. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me," Nathan said. "Not because of any bargain, but because I love you and I want us to be a family. You, me, and Corwin. What do you say?" She was crying now, but she was also smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you too, Nathan. I have for so long, but I was afraid to hope that you might feel the same." He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony in front of the schoolhouse. The whole village turned out, even Edward Thorne, though he stood in the back and left before the celebration really got started. Mara wore a simple dress of deep blue, and Nathan wore his best suit, and Corwin stood beside them as they exchanged vows, beaming with pride. The village women had organized a feast, and tables were set up in the schoolyard, laden with food and drink. There was music and dancing, and for a few hours, Thornfield felt like the best place in the world. Mara and Nathan danced together as the sun set, and Nathan thought he'd never been happier. Later, as the celebration was winding down, Mara pulled him aside. "I have something I want to do," she said. "Something I have been thinking about." "What is it?" "I want there to be a public reading every season," she said. "A day when anyone from the village can come and share something they have read or written, to remind everyone of what we have built here and to keep building it. What do you think?" "I think it's a perfect idea," Nathan said. And so the tradition began. Every 3 months, Thornfield held a reading day. Attendance grew each time as people came to listen and to participate. The schoolhouse became a true center of the community, a place where anyone could come to learn, regardless of age or background. Nathan continued to teach during the days, but he also held evening classes for adults, and Mara often assisted him, helping newer students while continuing to expand her own skills. Corwin thrived. He devoured every book Nathan could provide and began writing his own stories, tales of adventure and bravery that he read aloud during the public reading days. The other children, who'd once been wary of him, now counted him as a friend. He was still quiet and a bit shy, but there was a confidence in him now that hadn't been there before. 2 years after their wedding, Mara gave birth to a son. They named him Nathaniel after his father and called him Nat. He had his mother's green skin and his father's dark hair, and from the moment he was born, he was loved fiercely by both his parents and his older brother. Corwin took his role as big brother seriously, reading to Nat even when the baby was too young to understand, determined that his little brother would grow up surrounded by stories. Nathan watched his family grow and felt a deep sense of contentment. He'd come to Thornfield looking for a place to make a difference, and he'd found more than he'd ever imagined. He'd found a community that, despite its flaws and fears, was capable of change. He'd found students who reminded him every day why teaching mattered. And he'd found love, the kind of love that grew from respect and shared struggles, and the simple joy of being together. On the 3rd anniversary of the first public reading day, Nathan and Mara stood together at the front of the schoolhouse, watching as Corwin prepared to read. He was 10 now, tall for his age and growing more confident by the day. The story he'd written was about a boy who didn't fit in, who felt like he was caught between two worlds, but who found his place by being brave enough to be himself. It was a story born of experience, and Nathan felt his throat tighten as he listened. When Corwin finished, the crowd applauded, and Nathan saw pride in every face. This was what they'd built together, a place where a child like Corwin could stand before a crowd and be celebrated, where an orc woman could learn to raid and be respected, where a teacher could choose principle over convenience and be supported. Mara slipped her hand into his and Nathan squeezed it gently. "We did it," she said quietly. "We did," Nathan agreed, "and we're just getting started." The reading day continued with voices young and old sharing words and ideas. Nathan looked around at the schoolhouse, at the faces of his students and neighbors, at his wife and sons, and felt a profound gratitude. He'd taught a boy to raid, and in doing so, he'd taught a village to see beyond its fears. He'd refused a bargain, and in return, he'd gained everything that mattered. As the sun began to set, and the crowd slowly dispersed, Nathan stood with Mara in the doorway of the schoolhouse. Corwin and Nat were playing nearby, their laughter bright in the evening air. "I never thanked you properly," Nathan said, "for walking into this schoolhouse that first morning, for asking me to teach Corwin, for giving me the chance to be part of your lives." Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think I am the one who should be thanking you. You changed everything for us." "We changed everything for each other," Nathan said. "That's how the best things happen." She smiled, and in that smile Nathan saw their future stretching out before them. More students to teach, more stories to share, more seasons of growth and learning and love. The journey that had begun with a desperate bargain had led them here, to this place of belonging and purpose. And it was exactly where they were meant to be. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still those in Thornfield who harbored old prejudices, who grumbled about orcs in the schoolhouse, or muttered about the sanctity of tradition. but they were increasingly in the minority, drowned out by the voices of those who'd seen firsthand what education could do, who'd watched their children flourish under Nathan's teaching, who'd witnessed the transformation of their village into a true community. The schoolhouse itself expanded. What had begun as a single room now had an addition, built with lumber donated by grateful parents and labor volunteered by students past and present. There were shelves upon shelves of books now, some purchased with village funds, others donated by families who wanted to contribute to the growing library. Nathan had students of all ages, from children as young as 5 to grandparents determined to learn their letters before they died. Mara became as much a fixture of the school as Nathan himself. She had a gift for working with struggling students, for understanding the frustration of adult learners who felt embarrassed by their lack of knowledge. She was patient and encouraging, and more than one villager credited her with giving them the confidence to keep trying when they wanted to give up. Corwin, as he grew older, began to help teach the younger children. He was patient like his stepfather and encouraging like his mother, and he had a particular talent for making difficult concepts understandable. Nathan watched him work and felt a quiet pride. The frightened little boy who'd hidden in the back of the classroom had become a confident young man with a bright future ahead of him. When Corwin turned 12, he asked Nathan if he could start a special project. "I want to collect the stories of the village," he said. "The old ones, the ones the grandparents tell. I want to write them down so they don't get lost." Nathan thought it was a wonderful idea, and together they began the work of preservation. Corwin would visit with the elders, listening carefully to their tales of the early days of Thornfield, of the hardships and triumphs, of the people who'd built the village from nothing. He wrote everything down in his careful hand, and then he'd read the stories back during the public reading days, giving voice to history and memory. The project had an unexpected effect. The elders, many of whom had been among the most resistant to change, softened. They saw this young orc boy treating their stories with reverence, preserving their legacy for future generations. It was hard to maintain prejudice against someone who cared so deeply about your history. Slowly, grudgingly, some of the last barriers began to fall. When Nat was old enough, he joined his brother and parents in the schoolhouse. He was a lively child, full of energy and curiosity, and he kept everyone on their toes. Where Corwin was thoughtful and deliberate, Nat was impulsive and enthusiastic, diving into every new subject with wholehearted joy. Nathan and Mara watched their sons learn and grow together, and felt blessed beyond measure. On the evening of the 5th anniversary of the first public reading day, after the crowds had gone home and the schoolhouse was quiet, Nathan and Mara sat together on the steps, watching the stars come out. "Do you remember that first morning?" Mara asked. "When I walked in here with Corwin and made that foolish bargain." "It wasn't foolish," Nathan said. "It was brave. You were trying to give your son a future, and you were willing to sacrifice anything to make that happen." "I thought you would accept," Mara admitted. "I thought that was how the world worked, that nothing came without a price, that I would have to give up something to get what we needed." "I'm glad I proved you wrong," Nathan said. She smiled. "You did more than that. You showed me that there were people who gave freely, who helped without expecting anything in return. You restored my faith in goodness." "You gave me something too," Nathan said. "Purpose, meaning, a reason to fight for what I believed in. Before you walked through that door, I was just going through the motions, teaching because it was what I knew how to do but not really feeling it. You reminded me why it mattered." Mara rested her head on his shoulder. "We are a good team, you and I." "The best," Nathan agreed. Inside the schoolhouse, a lamp still burned on Nathan's desk, illuminating the stacks of papers and books that were the evidence of a day's work. Tomorrow, there would be more students, more lessons, more moments of breakthrough and understanding. The work was never really done, but that was all right. It was work worth doing, work that made a difference. Nathan thought about the notice the council had nailed to his door all those years ago, the threat of dismissal that had seemed so dire at the time. It had led to the public reading day, which had led to the village rallying behind him, which had led to the expansion of the school's mission. Sometimes the worst moments open the door to the best outcomes. "I love you," he said to Mara, the words as easy and natural as breathing. "I love you too," she replied. They sat together in the quiet evening, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something beautiful out of courage and conviction. Around them, the village of Thornfield slept, secure in the knowledge that their children were learning, their community was growing, and their future was bright. In the years that followed, Nathan's reputation spread beyond Thornfield. Other villages began to send representatives, asking how he'd built such a successful school, how he'd managed to bring a divided community together. Nathan always gave the same answer: treat every student with respect, teach without prejudice, and never underestimate the power of people who want to learn. Some villages took his advice to heart. Others dismissed it as idealistic nonsense. Nathan didn't worry about the ones who wouldn't listen. He focused on the ones who would, offering guidance and support to teachers who wanted to follow his example. Thornfield became known as a place of learning and tolerance, and that reputation attracted new families. The village grew, and with it, the school. Nathan hired an assistant teacher, a young woman named Clara who'd been one of his first students and who'd gone on to study at a teacher's college in the capital. Together, they expanded the curriculum, adding subjects like history and basic sciences, giving their students a broader education than most frontier villages could offer. Mara started a lending library, organizing the donated books and creating a system where anyone in the village could borrow them. It was a simple thing, but it had a profound impact. Literacy became not just a skill, but a way of life in Thornfield. People read for pleasure, for knowledge, for connection. The library became as much a gathering place as the schoolhouse, a space where ideas were shared and discussions flourished. Corwin, at 16, was offered a scholarship to attend the teachers' college in the capital. It was a tremendous opportunity, one that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Nathan and Mara were torn between pride and sadness at the thought of him leaving, but Corwin had made his decision. "I want to come back," he told them the night before he left. "I want to learn everything I can, and then I want to come back and teach here, alongside you. This is my home. These are my people. I want to help build something even better." Nathan embraced him, fighting back tears. "We'll be here waiting for you," and they were. Corwin spent 3 years at the college, learning pedagogy and philosophy, studying literature and mathematics. He wrote letters home every week, full of ideas and enthusiasm, and Nathan and Mara treasured every one. When he finally returned, he was a certified teacher in his own right, ready to take on responsibilities and bring fresh perspectives to the school. The first day Corwin stood in front of a classroom as a teacher rather than a student was one of the proudest moments of Nathan's life. He watched from the doorway as his stepson introduced himself to a room full of wide-eyed children, and he saw confidence and compassion in equal measure. Corwin had found his calling, just as Nathan had found his. Nat, meanwhile, had discovered a love for stories that rivaled his brother's. But where Corwin liked to collect and preserve existing tales, Nat wanted to create new ones. He filled notebooks with adventures and romances, with heroes and villains and magical creatures. Mara encouraged his creativity, and Nathan taught him the technical skills of writing, how to structure a narrative and develop characters. By the time Nat was 14, he'd written a full-length novel, a sprawling fantasy about a world where different species learn to live together in peace. "It is good," Mara said after reading it. "Very good, you should be proud." "It's based on us," Nat said a bit shyly, "on our family, on what father and mother built here." Nathan read the novel and recognized echoes of their story in it. The themes of overcoming prejudice, of finding love in unexpected places, of building community through education and understanding. It was their legacy, translated into fiction, and it moved him deeply. "You should try to get this published," he told Nat. "People need stories like this." Nat did try, sending his manuscript to publishers in the capital and waiting nervously for responses. Most were rejections, polite but firm. But one small publishing house saw potential in the story and agreed to print a limited run. When the first copies arrived in Thornfield, the whole village celebrated. A local boy had become an author, and his book was being read in towns and cities across the region. The success of Nat's novel brought unexpected attention to Thornfield. Journalists came to write articles about the village where an orc boy had become a published author, where a human teacher and an orc woman had built a life together. Some of the coverage was sensationalistic, focused on the novelty of interspecies marriage and the supposed impossibility of what they'd achieved. But other articles were thoughtful and respectful, highlighting the genuine love and commitment that bound the family together. Nathan and Mara gave a few interviews, always emphasizing the same points. That love was love, regardless of who it was between. That education was the key to breaking down barriers. That change was possible when people chose courage over fear. They hoped their story would inspire others, and in some cases it did. Other mixed families began to speak up, no longer hiding their relationships in shame. Teachers in other villages started accepting orc students, citing Nathan's example. It wasn't a revolution. The world didn't change overnight, but it was progress, slow and steady, and that was enough. On the 10th anniversary of Nathan and Mara's wedding, the village threw a massive celebration. The public reading day was expanded to include music and dancing, storytelling and games. Tables groaned under the weight of food and laughter filled the air. Nathan stood in the center of it all, surrounded by family and friends, students past and present, and felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Mara found him in the crowd and took his hand. "Happy anniversary, my love." "Happy anniversary," he replied, pulling her close. "Can you believe it's been 10 years? "Sometimes it feels like longer," she said with a smile. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday." "I wouldn't trade a single moment of it," Nathan said. "Not the hard times, not the struggles. It all led us here." "To happiness," Mara said. "To happiness," Nathan agreed. They danced together as the sun set, their sons and the whole village watching with smiles. It was a perfect moment, the kind that you wish you could freeze in time and live in forever. But Nathan knew that life didn't work that way. Moments passed, time moved forward, and all you could do was cherish them while they lasted and build new ones to take their place. As the years continued to roll by, Nathan and Mara grew older together. Gray began to thread through Nathan's dark hair, and lines appeared at the corners of Mara's eyes. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, seasoned by time and tested by challenges and proven strong. Corwin eventually married a human woman named Eliza, the daughter of the village blacksmith. Their wedding was another village-wide celebration, a testament to how much Thornfield had changed. The couple settled in a small house near the schoolhouse and started a family of their own. Their first child, A girl with her father's green skin and her mother's blonde hair was named Tessa. She became the first of a new generation, children born of mixed heritage and raised in a community that accepted them without question. Nat's writing career flourished. His second novel was even more successful than the first, and he began to travel, giving readings and talks about his work. But he always came home to Thornfield, always made time to visit the schoolhouse and tell stories to the children. He never married, claiming that his books were his children, and he seemed content with that choice. Nathan and Mara, now in their 50s, began to slow down. Nathan still taught, but he left more of the day-to-day work to Corwin and Clara. He focused on individual students who needed extra help, on developing new curriculum materials, on mentoring young teachers who came to Thornfield to learn from his example. Mara continued to run the library and assist with adult education, but she also spent more time in her garden, growing herbs and vegetables and flowers that she shared with the whole village. They often sat together in the evenings, reading side by side, comfortable in each other's presence. Sometimes they talked, sharing thoughts about a passage they'd read or plans for the next day. Other times they simply sat in silence, the kind of easy quiet that comes from decades of companionship. "You have any regrets?" Nathan asked one evening, then immediately winced. It was the kind of question that could lead to difficult conversations, the kind he usually avoided, but Mara just smiled. "None," she said. "Not a single one. This life we have built together, this family, this community, it is more than I ever dreamed possible when I walked into that schoolhouse all those years ago." "I'm glad," Nathan said, "because I have no regrets either. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She leaned over and kissed him, and the moment was tender and perfect. On the 15th anniversary of the first public reading day, the village held its largest celebration yet. It had become a tradition that people from neighboring villages, and even the capital, traveled to attend, drawn by the reputation of Thornfield's commitment to education and community. The event lasted an entire weekend, with readings and performances, workshops and discussions, all centered around the power of literacy and learning. Nathan was asked to give a speech, and he stood before the crowd with a mixture of pride and humility. 15 years ago, he began, a woman walked into my schoolhouse with her son and asked me to teach him to read. It was a simple request, but it changed my life. It changed this village. It reminded all of us that education is not a privilege reserved for a chosen few. It is a right, a necessity, a gift that we can give to each other. Thank you to Mara for having the courage to ask. Thank you to this community for having the wisdom to listen. And thank you to every student who has ever walked through that schoolhouse door for reminding me why I do this work. The applause was thunderous, and Nathan saw tears in many eyes. Mara stood beside him and he reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. Corwin took the podium next, speaking about the importance of preserving history and honoring the past while building the future. Then Nat read from his latest novel, a story about a teacher who changed the world one student at a time. The parallels to their own story were obvious, and the crowd listened with rapt attention. As the weekend drew to a close and the visitors began to depart, Nathan and Mara stood together in the schoolhouse, looking at the crowded shelves and the worn desks and the slate board covered in the day's lessons. "We did well, didn't we?" Mara said. "We did better than well," Nathan replied. "We did something that mattered." "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "After we are gone, will people remember? Will they keep teaching, keep learning, keep building?" Nathan looked at the schoolhouse, at the evidence of 15 years of work and love, and nodded. "Yes. Because we didn't just teach reading and writing. We taught values, compassion, equality, perseverance. Those lessons will outlast us. Our students will pass them on to their children, and their children will pass them on to theirs. This is our legacy, Mara. It will endure. She smiled, and Nathan could see the weight of worry lift from her shoulders. Good, she said. That is all I wanted to know. They locked the schoolhouse door and walked home together, hand in hand, through the village they loved. Above them, stars glittered in the clear night sky, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. It was peaceful and perfect, and Nathan felt a deep contentment settle in his bones. The story of Nathan Vance and Mara Moorhen became a legend in the region. Parents told their children about the teacher who refused a desperate bargain and instead gave freely. They spoke of the orc woman who learned to read and helped build a school that welcomed everyone. They remembered the public reading day that changed a village's mind, and the legacy of education that spread from Thornfield to communities far and wide. Years later, when Nathan and Mara were both old and gray, they sat together on the porch of their home and watched the sunset. Their sons and grandchildren were scattered across the region now, but they visited often, and the house was always full of laughter and love. I have been thinking, Mara said, her voice soft with age but still strong, about that first morning, about the bargain I tried to make. What about it? Nathan asked. I offered myself in exchange for Corwin's education, she said. You refused, but in the end you got both. You got me and you got to teach Corwin, so perhaps you made the better bargain after all. Nathan laughed. Maybe, but I didn't get you through a bargain. I got you through love. That's the only thing worth having. True, Mara said. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. I love you, Nathan said, as he had said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times more. I love you too, Mara replied. And as darkness settled over Thornfield, the schoolhouse stood quiet and solid, a beacon of hope and learning. Inside its walls, generations of students had discovered the power of words, the joy of knowledge, the possibility of change. It had all started with a simple request, a teacher's kindness, and a love that grew from respect and shared purpose. Nathan and Mara's story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was a story of small, steady acts of courage, of a woman who asked for help, and a man who gave it freely, of a community that learned to look beyond its fears and prejudices, of a family built on love rather than obligation, on choice rather than bargain. It was, in the end, a story about the transformative power of education and the enduring strength of love. And it was a story that would be told for generations to come, inspiring others to teach, to learn, to reach across divides and build bridges where walls once stood. In the quiet of the evening, with the stars beginning to appear overhead, Nathan and Mara sat together in perfect contentment. They had lived full lives, rich with purpose and meaning. They had raised good sons, taught countless students, and helped shape a community that valued learning and equality. Their journey had begun with a desperate bargain and evolved into something far greater. A real partnership, a true love, and a legacy that would outlast them both. The schoolhouse would continue to welcome students, the library would continue to share books, and the public reading days would continue to bring the community together. And somewhere in the heart of Thornfield, in the memories of everyone they'd touched, Nathan and Mara's story would live on. A reminder that courage and kindness could change the world, one person at a time. That love could flourish in unexpected places. That the simple act of teaching someone to read could ripple outward, transforming not just one life but an entire community. As the night deepened and the stars shone bright, Nathan and Mara remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts intertwined. Their story had reached its happy ending, but the legacy they'd built would continue forever, a testament to the power of education, compassion, and love that asked nothing in return but gave everything freely.